welcome panelists. I'd like to ask each of you to introduce yourself. How about in the order that's on the screen here? And I do see that I'm sharing my notes. So in the order that's on the screen here, and then let us know what you're working on and how the weather is in your area. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. In that case, I'll start. My name is Mary Hickok. I'm the founder of AIethicist.org, also Senior Research Director at Center for AI and Digital Policy. On ethics and policy side, how do we advocate for change? How do we put governance systems in place in organizations as well as in public benefit systems? And how do we change policy in a way that respects fundamental human rights, democratic values, and rule of law? And really happy to be here.
Natalia, how about you go next?
Yeah, hello. Great to be here. Super excited about this event. My name is Natalia Barina, and I'm an AI product leader and entrepreneur currently at Facebook, where I started and built a couple of teams. So one of the teams I started was around AI privacy and specifically focusing on a suite of technologies to keep AI private. So things like federated learning, differential privacy, etc. And then the other team is all about AI explainability. Before this, I also led AI teams at Salesforce, worked on search at Microsoft, which is one of the main AI use cases. Originally, I started my career as an engineer, received a degree in applied math from University of Washington, and as I mentioned, also have entrepreneurial experience having built a social app called Parable that was bought by Samsung. Looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you. Dia, can you introduce yourself next?
Sure, and you all tell me if you're hearing the person outside who just decided to cut the lawn or something. So if that's coming through, I'll switch to headset. Hopefully it's clear.
You sound great.
Okay, yeah. Good. I was like, perfect timing. This would happen, right? I'm Dia Nguyen. My pronouns are she, her. And for those who may not see me, I'm a woman of African descent with brown skin, curly brown hair, and I'm wearing a peachy orange top. I've been with AWS for almost 4.5 years in professional services, initially focused on helping our customers understand and adjust their operations to a hybrid one with infrastructure and systems on premise and in the cloud. And at that time, we were defining a new operating model and helping them to transform their operations to support their cloud transformation efforts. Then I began to focus on organizational enablement to support migrations, modernization, and operations in the cloud. And last year, I transitioned to the emerging technologies and intelligent platforms team to build an area of practice focused on partnering with our customers as they adopt artificial intelligence and machine learning services and aid them in their responsible AI journey. Now, my path into this area is different than others on the panel. I studied computer science and programming early in my career and have influenced products for startups and growth stage companies, and pivoted into this area of AI ethics over the last few years. It's very personal to me. One, understanding the challenge that data as a result of sort of systemic and institutional or inequity occurs and how that influences decisions, but in particular, because I represent some of the underrepresented that often is at the end impact of many of our systems. So delighted to be here in the cast of the great women that you have on this panel, and certainly look forward to sharing as well as learning today in this platform.
Awesome. Thank you, Dia. Anna, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, happy to do so. My name is Anna Bethke. I use the pronouns they, she, and I am a principal data scientist at Salesforce, where I help teams. I'm based in the ethical AI practice team, and I help teams across Salesforce make sure that they have fair, accountable, transparent, and explainable tools, resources, as well as best practices for their models and products. Salesforce is a B2B type of organization, so a lot of what the engineers and other data scientists at Salesforce focus on is getting our customers, the other businesses, the best tools so that they can sell to and provide the best services to their customers. So it's a really interesting space to really scale up how we are able to provide ethical AI techniques. Before this, I was at Facebook and working in a very similar role for about a year after I was at Intel as the head of AI for social good. So both of these roles were very similar, trying to figure out how can we provide the most socially responsible and socially impactful technology to everyone globally. Before I stepped into these shoes, I was doing much more AI research. So specifically in natural language processing and for, how do we advance the state of the art in what we can do from a day-to-day perspective. Very happy to be here as well.
Thank you, Anna. And I guess last but not least, my very talented colleague, Mary Reagan.
If I can work the mute button. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here today. My name is Mary Reagan. I'm a data scientist at Fiddler. And of course, Fiddler is focused on, model monitoring and explainability and fairness for AI systems. So I'm also very passionate, I think like many of the women here on this panel today, very passionate about the topic of AI ethics and fairness. Before this, I got my PhD from Stanford, but in mineral physics, and really excited to learn from everyone here and talk about these issues.
Awesome. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to start off with just setting the stage. And I have some stats that I'm going to read, and just Marva, I think I'll start with you and ask a question about that. But the Bureau of Labor and Statistics found that in 2020, women were 47% of the U.S. workforce. And although they made up the majority of graduate, master's, and doctoral degrees, they only made up 26% of the data and AI workforce. So and I would say even further beyond that, the representative numbers for people of color are even worse. So Marva, I have a kind of an open-ended question for you. And I'm wondering if there are things we're missing by just focusing on the numbers, or if we just focus on the numbers.
And I'm going to open up that question further, your open-ended question with open-ended responses. First of all, the numbers themselves don't give us, even if we were to focus just on the numbers, they don't give us a detailed or complete picture. As is, at least in the United States, the diversity disclosures are still driven by EEO1 disclosures, which is like a one-pager of your numbers, your workforce. Doesn't necessarily show ask for further detail. So very much dependent on the companies to provide the detail and pick whatever they want to show. But let's look, when we're looking at even those numbers, we're looking at protected categories, which in itself is a different concept. You might get a skewed picture of a false sense of diversity and inclusion by those numbers as well. Just drilling down one level down, how we see gender, sex, race, ability are represented. We're not able to see how these categories are represented in middle or senior management. You just get, certain very generic categories. We don't get a full picture. We don't see how significantly non-white, non-male employees, employees with disabilities are not represented in this roles, but they are more in the support roles or support operation categories. And even drilling down one level further down that, looking at the intersectional identities, we're not seeing a lot of that detail either. Even if we were to go with the numbers, for any of the reports that I can get my hands on, we'll see that women of color, for example, in managerial roles, in executive roles, are still in single digits. You can actually count in some cases, even in big technology companies, the percentages are in single digits. But to your question about if we are only looking at the numbers, what are we missing? The numbers don't tell us the lived experiences of underrepresented groups in these companies, what the work environment looks like, what their chances are in these companies, how are their voices are being heard or not heard in a lot of the times, and also looking at the numbers that don't tell us the attrition. The differences in attrition, why not only women of color, LGBTQI, but people that are, again, in that non-white, non-male category, why are they living in higher numbers? What are the reasons? What does the workplace environment look like? And one final point, a third point I want to make is just looking at the numbers of how many graduates we have, how many people we have in the organizations, etc., frames that, for me at least, it frames that or reduces that framing into a pipeline problem only. So while, yes, we need to increase the numbers in the pipeline, that is definitely an issue, this is not just a pipeline issue. We need to look at things like addressing the work practices in terms of maternal and paternal leave, childcare imbalance, gender wage gap, etc. So just saying this is the number of graduates from STEM degrees really, really reduces that framing.
So that's a really good point about, it's not just about numbers. We need to look at things as a bigger systemic or system-wide issue. And that reminds me a little bit of a conversation, Dia, that you and I had a couple of days ago. We had a chat and you were discussing trust and responsible AI and how it's not all about technology. And I thought you just had some really good insights to share based on some of your experiences. And I was wondering if you could maybe share some of your thoughts, because I think that's a nice follow-on to what was just said.
Sure. Yeah. And I love what Merv said, and just bringing in, not distilling this down to just, an issue of recruiting or bringing in candidates, but this really requiring a much more complete and comprehensive look in order to be able to address and actually start to tackle the challenges of, the absence of representation and diversity in this particular area. I think when we were talking, I was saying that when we think about trust as humans, we generally don't trust what we don't understand. Our past experiences of harm or dysfunction may actually inform our current thinking or future interactions. And then those expectations, or perhaps the expectations that we have, may be misaligned. And so when we think about artificial intelligence and machine learning and its proliferated use, we can imagine that all three of those are true at some level. People don't completely understand it. There is a perception, and even in some cases, harm that might have been done, and expectations of what its capability is, or perhaps what it will produce, may be misaligned. And so that engenders a degree of mistrust. And that mistrust is not only for the company that produced the technology or produced the product, companies like mine and others that actually deliver and provide services to other organizations, and then the industries that use them. And we want to be able to leverage artificial intelligence, machine learning in ways to solve real world problems, right? To tackle some of the things that we saw as unattainable, like what we're seeing today, whether that's helping to reunite children from child sex trafficking or combating climate change by reducing commercial buildings and their carbon emissions, right? Those are the use cases that we're looking to be able to see AI applied and bring out some outcomes. So the pathway then to trust is what we say is responsible AI, right? It's companies embodying principles and operationalizing those so that they actually have the right things in place to consider, do we have fairness, and is there explainability so that we understand the outcomes, and is there clarity and accountability around who is responsible and what roles they'll play, and individuals understanding their specific job in the entire pipeline and how they have a role in ensuring that we are looking at the right problem and solving it in the right way. And so, my premise is that responsible AI is indeed the key to building trust, right? And trust in our systems. And that's something that we all have a part in so that we can ensure that transparency, accountability, explainability, our privacy and protection, fairness is not just something we talk about, but it's ingrained into the organization's daily functions and becomes central to the way they do business. It is indeed the new operating model by which they function, and that's part of the work that I get to do, in the role I play at the company at AWS is actually walking customers and having discussions about that and helping them operationalize or institutionalize responsible AI principles.
Awesome. Thank you. I love that phrase. The pathway to trust is responsible AI. I think I may use that. That's such a wonderful phrase. I'd like to turn this back to women in AI. And Anna, I noticed, looking at your background, you've worked in a lot of different settings, academic, research, high-tech companies. And so you have a lot of variety of experience. And I'm wondering, are there common themes that you see that tend to drive the gender gap?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think that there are, various patterns that can be seen, both that can help reduce gender gaps and ones that can wedge it apart. And a lot of it goes around being as transparent as possible and being as inclusive as possible. So, ensuring some things that I think are really helpful are, no, I'm going with the harmful first. Some things that can be harmful is, hiring somebody because they are a diverse candidate, because the person who's being hired will figure it out, and that will their retention, is certainly going to be affected. It was going back to university, I went to MIT where they, accept 50-50 men and women. And that can be, I think that has some really, really good positives. But the other hard thing is if you are a woman who is accepted into MIT, a lot of times, and this is something that I felt and some of my peers felt, is you were only accepted because of your gender and not because of the amazingness that you are. So basically imposter syndrome magnified. And, that, of course, isn't the case where, we eventually determine and find out that's okay, yeah, no, we belong here too. But, if you're a company and are only hiring because of diversity, then that's not great. But if you make certain that you have a diverse pool of people that you're looking towards, that you're not just saying, oh, I know buddy who needs a job, and, that can create very homogeneous teams. And if you have a homogeneous team, then it's much more likely that somebody who has more diversity, who is different than the norm, isn't going to really want to be in that team. They're going to feel like the odd duckling out, and no one wants to be the odd duckling out. So different things like that, like I think it's really important whenever companies do say, oh yeah, we're great in diversity and these are our diversity numbers, to also say like, okay, these are the gaps and this is where we're trying to go to, and to acknowledge that, like their process is not done yet. So I'm really encouraged whenever I hear that. It's like, yeah, we want to get here and this is where we need to work on. Retention is huge, like making certain that you have really good leave policies, really inclusive ways to work. Like I'm joining y'all from Madison, Wisconsin. I work remotely here. I'm going to forever be working remotely, and it's great. It's been really good for my husband and my cats and I. So, and the family that we moved closer to be towards. So yeah, those are some things I think that can both like encourage people of more diverse backgrounds to feel more included, and then also to like, if you do the corollaries, to drive it further apart.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And I love the focus on a diverse pool, of candidates. That's a great reminder. Mary, I have a question for you, about as a data scientist, about the AI systems themselves. And I think Anna talked a bit about, some of the things that can happen, from maybe a cultural standpoint, but from the AI systems themselves. So if we're actually looking at the solutions, how have you observed the impact of having less gender diversity or more or less women on the team success, or excuse me, on the success of the product itself or the solution itself?
Yeah. So I guess I want to say, I was thinking of this question really in terms of diversity in two ways, actually. And the one way is the way that you're mentioning it, Amy, which is the diversity of the ML practitioners actually that are in the room, right, when we're designing these systems. But of course, equally important is the diversity, the kind of diversity that's represented within our data sets. And really both are super important, right? So lack of diverse representation in our data sets can lead to models that are frankly very biased or don't work properly. Lack of diversity in the room for ML practitioners really can create blind spots for these teams where they're not even aware that they're not even aware of, and it'll lead to very poorly designed systems and poorly designed implementations. So we can look at a really perfect example of this, which is the work from Timnit Gebru and Buluini, in that what I consider now to be almost a classic example of their, facial recognition systems. And so this particular example, I think really, is going to illustrate how both of these aspects of diverse representation are important and actually like play into each other. So in that facial, if you're not familiar, I bet most of the people here are, but in that, in the facial recognition systems originally were only trained on data sets that had a majority of white faces. So this made the technology, once it was implemented, basically not functional for any sort of darker skin tones. And interestingly, this effect was more pronounced for women with darker skin tones. And I really do not think it's a coincidence that it was two Black women who brought their own unique life perspectives that discovered this huge flaw, right, in the system. And maybe I'll share one other small example that happened to a friend of mine very recently within the last couple of months. She's a machine learning engineer at Google. And her team was working on a project that involved health apps. So there was a subset of this health app data that was categorized as calendar apps. Now, the rest of her team was all male and basically had no idea why a calendar app would be classified as a health app. And they actually thought it was a mistake and wanted to exclude this data from the data set. And I think most women can immediately guess what those calendar apps are, right? They're going to be menstrual tracking apps or perhaps fertility apps. And if my friend hadn't spoken up, that data really would have been excluded. And so I think it's really impossible, you know, as Merve said earlier, to sort of quantify how many moments like this happen, right? So the illustration of you know, Timney Gabru and Buluimi, who wrote a paper on it, right? We're all aware of this now. But the moment that happened with my friend is a teeny moment in a room, and we move on. And so it's impossible to know, I think, how many moments happen like that. But I think it's obvious to say that having a person of color or a woman in the room really matters when these systems are being designed.
So Natalia, and thank you, Mary, this is a great example. Natalia, I'm wondering if you can add on to that as somebody who actually manages, you know, multiple AI product teams, if there's some additional thoughts you'd like to add to what Mary said.
Yeah, no, I think this is perfect. Building on Mary's examples, if you don't have an inclusive environment that, you know, that's supportive of people, both, you know, women, as well as, you know, people of color, it results in a certain product and certain problems that are manifested this way. And I think what's really important is to have a diverse team is one thing. So one is to build that team, but once they're there, it's really key to support the team. And the support piece is really crucial because, you know, if we look at, you know, going back to the first question we tackled around like the numbers and so on, like one of the key statistics is 41% of women working in tech. And this is not even AI, but it's even worse in AI. But in tech, eventually women leave the field. And it's compared to 17% of men. And the question is, you know, why do they leave the team? They leave the team because they don't feel supported. They don't have management support. They don't have leadership support. And they are in a climate that's not accepting of them. And so building that culture of inclusivity and making sure that people are supported is just really crucial. And it's, in my opinion, one of the answers for why there are so few women. I don't think this is a pipeline problem. I mean, pipeline is just a part of it, but retaining women, it's just like the industry does just a horrible job at it. And so I think it all goes to, you know, having supportive managers, managers who are open to hearing complaints from women, because it turns out that professional and emotional costs for speaking out about discrimination can be huge. And this is in terms of retaliation, being perceived as less employable, etc. So, you know, again, I think it's really crucial as a manager to offer that support and to create the right environment, and it has to go all the way up to leadership.
So Natalia, you had shared with us previously a list of things that you thought would encourage or discourage women, like from either, you know, staying, you know, what encourages them to stay, what, you know, compels them to leave. I wonder if maybe you could give us a couple of examples from your encourage list, and then I'd like to ask some of the other, you know, panelists that maybe have some feelings around this as well that could maybe talk about the discourage piece, or whichever piece they'd like to talk more about.
Yeah, I could kick it off. I think on the encourage part, personally, I've been in industry for 20 years now, and I think if there's one piece of advice I would give to anyone, and something I try to follow, which is a difficult one to follow, is it's really about having a supportive manager and supportive leadership. In my opinion, it's really more important who you work for than even, for me personally, than even what the job is. Two, leaders who speak out and, again, protect people. Formalized hiring and promotion criteria is another one. So when there is ambiguity, things tend to get weird. So for example, when you're hiring, make sure that you look at a diverse slate of candidates. You make sure that it's clear what's asked of people when it comes to promotions. And then of course, like, you know, offering parental leave, offering leave of absence for, you know, if people have medical reasons or need to take care of others in their lives. I think these are all the things, components of providing that environment which would retain women and diverse candidates in general.
Would anybody like to jump in on things that we shouldn't be doing, things that maybe compel women to leave roles in AI? Marva, go for it.
Not only for AI and for all tech companies, as well as all big companies, to be honest, not looking at this as a diversity, like the ENI initiative problem or pipeline problem. This is business. This is about business. This is about, what is good for your employees, your company, your consumers. This is the holistic picture. It's not a do nice, do good on the side kind of thing. Is one. Second thing, not even like being at the table is not even enough. Being at the project team is not enough if your voices, to what Natalia was saying, if your voice, if your comments, your feedback is not respected. So there you might have the most diverse experiences, backgrounds, knowledge in the team, but if it's the project manager or CEO making the final decision, then that's just like window dressing. Yes, you're collecting, you're getting all this feedback, but it is someone ultimately making a decision rather than a participatory decision and design. So actually walking the talk is the bottom line, not just doing it for ethics or windows washing.
Awesome, thank you.
Yes.
Go ahead, Dia.
I just wanted to jump in because what Marva is saying is like, this is not a performative thing, right? That it actually has to be more than just we do this because it looks like the right thing to do. And we have a couple of initiatives that will focus on pipeline as opposed to really focusing on inclusion. I think our first step really is building a culture of inclusion and actually honoring and respecting people's voice and the lived experience they bring, but also what they have in terms of their skill and ability to impact and influence our teams. And if we actually look at that, diversity becomes a little easier to do when we have an inclusive culture, right? But what typically happens is organizations immediately focus on recruiting. And recruiting brings people in, but it doesn't make them stay, right? And that is whether it's women or it's people of color or people who are differently abled. They need environments where their voice and perspective is going to be heard, where they're honored and valued for the contribution and the lived experience they bring. And then when we think about this, and Mary mentioned this in terms of like even being able to address bias, it's not just in our engineering teams, right, or our data scientists. When we talk about this, I'm talking about diversity being all the way at the beginning of the cycle when we start deciding what problems do we solve with AI? Who's in the room, right? That perspective that's missing has an impact. And I use an example like this often because sometimes people don't consider, right, the fact that there are historic and systemic inequities over time that are propagated into our institutions, into our data. So even some notions that there is ground truth and there is data that we can leverage that is unbiased and then make decisions based off of that, at its core is fallible. And if you don't understand the lived experience, if you don't understand historical context, if you don't understand systemic issues or inequities, and don't have that perspective coming in, and I'm not saying that other people don't, but typically those are people from marginalized communities. So when they're not in the room, when you don't have someone LGBTQIA+ who can bring their voice, we had one of my team members actually talk about how our systems, most data and text, translate everything binary, he and she. What does that mean? We've lived with that all the time and don't consider the impact that has on that community, right? On that set of consumers, on that people group. And so if we're absent of those voices, most times we don't think of, other people are not thinking about that. The majority culture, the majority gender is not thinking about some of those in the beginning, right? Before we even start training them up, before we even start collecting data, right? Some of that has to happen earlier in the process. So we say every part of the life cycle, who's annotating your data? Are they thinking about that? Have they been trained? Are they considering, right? When we start looking at medical studies and how are we looking at even gathering the data that we need? And is that going to be, representative of the populations we serve or the people that will be impacted? That's way before we get down to training the model.
Yeah, you're so right.
And we have to bring that into the picture.
It starts in the beginning, doesn't it? Great points. And I'm just looking at the time. We have about 8 minutes left, and I want to pivot a little bit to advice that we might offer, or that some insights that the panelists might offer to women considering moving into AI. So I guess, Anna, I'd like to start with you and just say, are there things that you would consider, or women should consider, when they're thinking about pivoting their careers into an AI area?
Yeah, totally. It's a great area to join. I've loved being in it and have met so many wonderful individuals. I think right now there are tons of different resources and courses that you can take, from things like Coursera. Salesforce has like lots of trailheads. So a lot of these free resources, basically, to if you're trying to pivot or if you're trying to brush up. And then, practice, get your hands dirty in some data, and start to see okay, how do I actually think about this data? Is this really for me? Driven Data is an organization that I love to point people to. It basically is like Kaggle, but just for social good. So you can try to figure out malaria cases. You can try to figure out where vaccines need to go, different things like that. So it's Kaggle is also lovely, and they have lots and lots of problems too. But I would also check out Driven Data to start to play, start to practice, and then find your peeps. There's some wonderful organizations like Women in AI, Women in Data Science, and oh gosh, so many. There's the Anita Borg Institute, etc. So find a group, find your peeps, and go from there.
I love that phrase, find your peeps. So true. Mary, do you have anything you'd like to add to that, maybe in regards to evaluating particular roles or, areas that they might be interested in?
Yeah, I think, on the one hand, my advice would maybe be general advice that I would say to everyone. Of course, you want to make sure that your skill sets match, that your ethical viewpoint is aligned with what your company is doing. I think that if that's true, then you'll be happier and more productive. I think, and this kind of goes back to the retention question of, are there other, maybe you can look to see, are there other, women or people of color on your team or promoted to management positions? What kind of track record does the company have? And I guess I also would say, there's been studies that have been done that show that men are more, likely to apply for a job if they meet 1/3 of the listed sort of skill set, whereas women will wait until they meet all or most of the criteria on that. And so, this is a little bit on, mostly I think I try to focus on, I think big changes really come from systemic changes or group changes that we do. But on a small individual note, if you see that maybe you don't match all of the skills there, maybe go and apply for it anyway, so.
Nice. I love that recommendation. It's so true. I think, Natalia, you had you had shared earlier, I think we all met and chatted earlier, some ideas on how the opportunities in AI are just different than other tech opportunities. Can you share that with the audience?
Yeah, I think AI there's tech which people don't think is as accessible as it really is. But then there's AI, which is an evolving field. And there's a variety of roles and things that are coming up that are related to AI that are evolving and changing. And I think people should not let the technical barriers stop them. There's a lot in terms of to look into and consider in terms of ethics, in terms of policy, in terms of legal implications, in terms of design for AI. We don't really know what that means yet. We haven't done a great job. It's again, like I love Dia, I love one of your points earlier around trust in AI. Like, how do we design systems that are explainable and actually work with people to explain what's happening? That's been a thing to actually foster trust with people. So there's just a lot here, and I think I would encourage everyone not to be scared and to consider the opportunities in the field because it's lucrative and it's growing. I do want to cap with just like a few of my, my lessons is I think, who you work for is the most important thing. Two, the best way out is always through. This is a Robert Frost quote, and the whole point is hang in there. We want people to stay, and we learn. The lesson is even if it's tough, it'll make you tougher. We learn from it, and you'll grow. So that's one way to I hope that will help people. Yeah, and then the third was actually kind of what I talked about. AI is a growing field, and I think the one thing that I do want to add to that is the difference between AI product and other product is AI is probabilistic, so it has this like nature where it's just you're not sure what's going to happen. It's less controllable, whereas traditional software is much better understood. So that's like one thing to think about if you look into AI.
Awesome, thank you. And I want to bring back to women that are actually considering different places to work. And I'm wondering, Dia, if you have any advice for women if they're evaluating whether this is going to be a safe and healthy place for them to work, what they should consider.
I think this is probably general, but the one thing that I would say is it a healthy place is a place where you can prioritize your health and well-being. It's a place that doesn't inflict harm. And I say that, and that can come in a number of different ways, right? Certainly some of the experiences that some of us have had might trigger or might have been harmful either emotionally or otherwise. But I would say, can I prioritize my health and well-being, and what does that look like for me as an individual? I think a healthy place is a place where you can learn and grow and see the potential of growth. And there were some things that were mentioned earlier, Natalia was talking about as well, just kind of the things that we want to have and in an environment. But healthy for me is, when healthy and probably ideal is it a place that I enjoy coming to? And that doesn't mean every day is great, because we all have those days, but I don't see it as a chore, right? It's something that I enjoy, and it's fun for me to do. And I think that kind of tends us towards a more healthier environment where we feel like we can bring our whole selves and thrive.
Awesome. Thank you. So important to consider that when you're looking at opportunities. We have less than, I think we have about a minute and a half left. We have a minute left. So that if any of you have any wrap-up thoughts, like in 20 seconds, on something that you really want our audience to take away, I guess I'd open it up for you to do that just very quickly.
I can go first.
Please. Yeah.
I would say don't think of AI and ethics and responsible innovation just in the context of your work as you're working in a company. Think of it as a consumer, as a citizen, what it means to you, your kids, your parents, and you can advocate for that stuff as well. You don't have to just do it in your company, and what your decisions of your activities of your network has an impact on you. So this is not only about your job in a technology company.
And I believe that we are wrapping up, and people are going to be going to the next session. So thank you again, everybody, for all your time. Really appreciate it. Thank you again for your time.